Hello, my beautiful blossoms, blooms, and buds. I'm Rosebud Reads, and welcome to my book garden. Welcome also to Copper Coins Book 3, Part 2. Just double checking. Um, we are moving right along. I know it's kind of funky because it's a different day this week, but we had a pretty steamy chapter last time, and I'm kind of wondering, like, are we going to continue the steam train or are we going different places this time? So I guess we will see. But anyway, logistics. This is a chill stream. What that means is I will be talking with my lovely book garden. I will be talking to myself. I'll be talking to the book. I will be making side comments, and occasionally I might look something up, either a word or if need be, if I want like a reference to something, I might look up a picture. But I know that's not everyone's style, which is completely fine. Some people just want the straight read through. Um but we like a little more. Hello, Cookielicious. How are you doing today? But yeah, if it's not your thing, that's completely fine. But if you stick around, you might find you enjoy it. You never know. If still not, it's okay. It isn't everyone's thing. But yeah. So excited for Divine Cat, huh? Yeah, so I see you watched the premiere video about who won. Um I finished that just a little bit ago, so I was like, you know what, we're just gonna post it. But yeah, feeling lazy and tired. How about me? I actually had a very productive day. I went and worked out, I walked my dog, since I'm going out of town tomorrow, I got everything packed, I cleaned my house. Um, I helped with dinner, I have been working more on those snakes. I have some to show, so, like, been doing a lot today, but just, like, normal stuff. But it's a nice feeling getting stuff done, checking stuff off the list. So I'm doing good, but yeah. This is a mature stream. That means there are 18 plus themes, which is like gore, violence, sexy times, sometimes not so happy sexy times. But like usually, all right. If you are watching this later, you will kind of get a little more of an indication because there will be a trigger warning in the title. There will be a short description in the description, as well as a timestamp if something that I believe could potentially be triggering occurred. If I missed something after this is streamed and you feel like it should be marked, please just leave a comment in the video. If you are here during the live, there's only so much I can do. I'm reading this live, and for a lot of these stories, I haven't read them before. Or if I have, it's been a while. Um but usually I'll be able to see when something is potentially coming up and give a little bit of a warning. There is no worries if you feel like things are getting a little rough for you, and if you want to come back later where it's marked and all that. Hello, Truffle. um take care of yourself and your mental health. Like, we're here for a good time. We're just here to chill, to chat, and to read some Danmei. Like, I've no hard feelings if you need to leave and come back, or just decide like, hey, this series isn't for me. Like, it's all good. But yes. Thank you. I like this one a lot. I think it has something on the back too. Yeah. Read books, be kind. Yeah. It's just a comfy shirt, but thank you. Um and so it's nice because sometimes, like, I just don't want to take like that much effort with my hair. Not that I take all that much effort with my hair, but it just like it's nice to just pop it back. But yeah. I am not sponsored. If I ever am sponsored, you all will be the first to know. Um But yeah, I do this because I can. The only things I own are the physical copy in front of me and my time, and sometimes not even that. Ooh, you're getting your Scumbill and Self-Saving System box set after so many months. That is exciting, Cookielicious. How about you, Truffle? What's going on with you? But yes, I am not fluent. um, it will be kind of readily apparent on the names and places. I do my best, and I feel like I'm getting slightly better. But if I am egregiously butchering something and it's consistent, please just let me know. Either drop a comment in the live, or if it's later, just give me a little note like, "Hey, it's kind of said like this instead." I'm completely open to constructive criticism. Just be kind. I am doing this for fun, and trying my best. But yeah. Um, I think that's about it. I do have some snaky friends to share. So Truffle, you finally finished Dinghai Fushen 3. Feng Qianjun has the worst luck with women. Oh man. And Cheng Xing and Xiang Shu are still being stupid about each other. It's funny. Want to read Ding Hai. It sounds so interesting. Also, joyful reunion art is art baiting me. Yeah, that is pretty. So, Truffle, I asked for snake recommendations last week, and you delivered, and so I delivered. Ta-da! Here's your coral snake. Their name is Apple. They're very smarkly. Yes. I kind of went a little overboard with this one because it was just stripes. But yes. And then was kind of on a roll. So this is Lemon. They're a python, a baby python. But yes, Lemon. And I am currently working on a blue viper. So I will probably bring the stuff with over vacation. But yeah. Thank you. So far this is what I have. They're growing. I have 10 of these wooden snakes. So I'm hoping by the convention on the 15th I'll have all 10 done. But yes, they are super shiny. They are fabulous. But yeah. They're very I was so sad when I lost my last snake at the last con I went to. And it wasn't bedazzled, but it was very similar to just the garter snake. So I'm like, this time, no lost snakes. But yeah, they'll just chill over here in the background. Oh yes, Cookielicious, I know you saw it, but I do have another announcement. Our book poll is done. So I am proud to present our next series. The White Cat's Divine Scratching Post. Not gonna lie, it was literally tied 3 ways, until I think, like, noon today when, someone was, very kind and did a tiebreaker. But I was kinda getting a little worried, um, about, like, how are we gonna do this? So I'm glad that someone helped decide that. You all seemed pretty excited about this one when we were discussing which books to do, during the live, but yeah. It's a fun one, and Bhutan's art is so pretty. It is so pretty. I love the colors and just the lines. Um, and it is a fun one. The interior illustrations are so pretty too in White Cat. Bailu Bailuo is one of the funniest side characters. Ooh, you know me, I do love my side characters. So, I'm very excited about that. While we're still talking logistics, just a reminder that I will not be streaming the rest of this week, but there is a pre-recorded card opening live stream. I had a nice time. It's a little rough, but they're pretty. I had fun, and I hope you will enjoy. According to the art, the white cat should be blue-eyed and deaf. I mean, some of the cats, the white cats with blue eyes, I know what you mean. Usually they're deaf. Doesn't have to be, unless that's canonically the thing. Oh, good. I'm glad you guys like the card videos. Okay. I think that's everything. Oh yeah, and then the week after, next week, so next week is just normal schedule. It'll be back to normal. Okay. 11:30. All right. So, let's look and see what happened last time. Ah, yes. So last time we had our kind of side quest where we delivered one of the lost soldiers tags back to their house. Initially, the soldier's soul requested that he deliver the tag to his family, his wife, so that they'd know what happened. But on the way there, they heard the news about an unfortunate passing of someone else who ended up taking their life because they realized that they were in sundowning dementia. They realized that I believe it was their wife had already passed away and they couldn't handle it. They lost that hope. And oh yes, they also found out about the cave of 100 insects from the shaman? Sorcerer? I forget what they call them in this one. I think they just called him Old Chew. But yes, they found out about the cave of 100 insects, which it seemed like they were on their way there. But, regarding the soldier, he decided, no, I don't want them to lose hope. And asked that he be buried in the back garden so that he could watch over his family. And kind of protect them even if there's not much he could do. But just keep watch over them. So, they also had some storytelling about reincarnation and a flower that can help dictate what your next life will be. How that's not a great thing. But yes. Anyway, we ended with they had just passed the village boundary stone and dispelled the concealment spell. They would be on the mountain pass to our counts. So, our donkey count is sitting at 80, 85, 90. Wait, hang on. So 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 91. All right. Our Jiang Xining suffering is sitting at 5, 10, 15, 20, 24. Our face count is sitting at 5, 10, 13. And our wanted poster count is sitting at 9. Which, I mean, I think our Jiang Xining Shuxian was surprised. What kind of show is this? The court of imperial sacrifices had long established rules. They only knelt to heaven and earth. Thus, even when meeting the state preceptor, they greeted with a bow, not kneeling. The sight of 100 people in wide-sleeved white robes, wearing masks patterned with fierce and ancient beasts, silently and uniformly bowing in perfect sync, was still a spectacular sight. The grandeur carried a solemn, reverent air. If each of them had been holding incense, it would have looked like a ceremony to worship the heavens. For ordinary people, this scene would have been plenty grand, but it wasn't special to Shushan. He was only momentarily stunned because the sight was so unexpected. He rarely paid attention to mortal court affairs, and he couldn't be bothered to learn the ever-changing official titles and institutions across dynasties, since they had nothing to do with him. When he saw the court of imperial sacrifices on their flags, he felt nothing. However, based on the attire of these 100 or so people, he guessed they were officials in charge of rituals and divination. Over the many years of his life, he'd become familiar with such displays. He almost blurted out, "Have you chased me all the way here to beg for rain?" Xuanmin, standing beside Shushan, frowned and took a small step forward before he could speak. He was now partially shielding Shushan from the newcomers. With a frosty expression, he looked over the group critically. "What business do you have?" "What business?" At the front of the procession, the chief diviner and the chief ritualist, who had just been about to greet the state preceptor, froze in place. Yeah, it's cute that he stepped in front of him. I agree, Truffle. Fortunately, having grown up in the imperial court, they didn't lose their composure. Maintaining their bows, they exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with shock and confusion. Had they mistaken his identity? Impossible! His stature, bearing, and gait were unmistakably the state preceptor's. They didn't even need to wait for him to approach. They could recognize him in one glance. Then what was his proclamation about? Was it deliberate? Perhaps he was on important business and couldn't reveal his identity? The chief diviner and chief ritualist had entered the court of imperial sacrifices in the same year. One could say that, after growing up together, they were childhood friends. If nothing else, they shared a tacit understanding. With a brief exchange of a few more glances, they arrived at the same suspicion. Just as this thought emerged for both of them, a faint hissing sound came from beside them. Startled, they looked down and saw that the source was a small flame that had appeared near the chief diviner's fingers. The flame vanished in an instant, leaving behind a slip of paper in its wake. This wasn't unfamiliar to them. When the state preceptor needed to send a message, he often used this method. Logically, the carrier pigeon the chief diviner had sent couldn't have reached Famen Temple and returned so quickly. The only explanation was that the state preceptor had coincidentally sent another message. The chief diviner discreetly picked up the folded slip of paper, but as she unfolded it, the sound of flapping wings came from behind her. "Another message," the chief ritualist said. He turned to retrieve the new note from a pigeon that had just landed. The two looked askance at each other and hurriedly read the notes. "This one is from the vice minister," the chief ritualist whispered. "He says Huaxi County reported sightings of a true dragon. The state preceptor has issued orders. The entire court of imperial sacrifices and the outer court guards of the Tianji Institute have set out. He wants us to keep an eye out here first." Though he kept his voice low, his tone rose slightly at the mention of true dragon, betraying his surprise. He quickly lowered his voice again. "Also, the vice minister says the state preceptor has left seclusion for urgent matters and will rendezvous with us in 3 days." As for the note from the state preceptor, it was as concise as ever. The chief diviner held it up for the chief ritualist to see. 5 words were written on it. Act as you see fit. The signature, as always, was Tong Dang. The two messages that arrived one after the other weren't particularly long, but their contents were puzzling. Why would the entire court of imperial sacrifices and Tianji Institute mobilize just because someone in Huaxi County claimed to have seen a true dragon? Nothing like that had ever happened before. The scale of the response was unusual, causing a sense of unease. However, what concerned the chief diviner and chief ritualist most wasn't this. It was the fact that the state preceptor had left seclusion for urgent matters. They couldn't help but connect this to their current situation, confirming their earlier guess. The state preceptor must have had his reasons, hidden circumstances or other arrangements that prevented him from acknowledging them. In that case, they had to cooperate fully. Ruining the state preceptor's plans? That was suicidal. Act as you see fit, the chief ritualist muttered. And act they would. The two quickly composed themselves and nodded at Xuanmin and Shushan. Part of me's wondering if someone's actually on their way there. Because, like, the whole I'll see you in 3 days thing. So, like, I wonder if the person that initially had the spider bite Xuanmin, this whole chapter counts as a face check. Like, I feel like there's shenanigans going on. Like, there's many shenanigans going on behind the scenes, political shenanigans, and yes, definitely a face count. So we are up to 14 for face count, but yes. Actually, I'm gonna give it 2 because they kind of were like. So that's at least 2. So we're up to 15 for face count. And counting, probably. A misunderstanding. We must have mistaken you for someone else, the chief diviner said. Mistaken us. Shushan chuckled and brushed some non-existent dust from his sleeve. Can I really take that at face value? Though the two groups were some distance apart, Shushan had caught the mention of True Dragon. If the other party had been upfront about their purpose, he wouldn't have minded, but their immediate claim of mistaken identity was suspicious. What kind of person needed to hide their identity? Someone with ulterior motives. Shushan usually couldn't be bothered to decipher mortal scheming, but he had been burned once before. The sight of such evasiveness reminded him of his stripped tendons and bones, and his smile turned cold. Our apologies for the rudeness. The mountain path is winding, and we didn't get a clear look when you rounded the bend. We mistook you for someone else based on your attire and stature. A foolish error, the chief ritualist said, not daring to look directly at Xuanmin, and instead cupping his hands toward Shushan. We beg your forgiveness. Since you're in a hurry, we won't delay you further, please. With that, he gestured to the procession behind him. The 100 or so people parted like waves, forming a neat path for Shushan and Xuanmin to pass through. God, that'd be so creepy, like, just seeing it part and then walking through that. Like, I could understand if they shuffled to one side, it's less creepy that way, but having to walk through them. Shushan let out a short snicker, but said nothing more. He strode forward without hesitation. He and Xuanmin walked together down the open path. Both were fearless to the core, so they showed no discomfort despite the unusual circumstances. Power to them. Their expressions were calm, their steps unhurried. Before Schwanmin reached them, the chief diviner and chief ritualist lowered their eyes just as they would have in the court of imperial sacrifices when facing the state preceptor. They didn't dare look directly at him under normal circumstances, and they seemed to have caused trouble, making the situation awkward. They kept their eyes firmly downcast and tried not to think of how they had nearly gone against the state preceptor's wishes. However, as Schwanmin passed by, the chief diviner couldn't help but glance briefly toward Schwanmin's hanging right hand, though she quickly looked away. Apart from this momentary lapse in composure, the two otherwise behaved appropriately. Respectful, but not overly deferential. They stole a few discreet glances at Shushian, though, as if worried this troublesome looking man might notice something amiss. I mean, you're not being subtle. Not gonna lie. But that was a mistake. Others might not have noticed their surreptitious. Yeah, I was right. Surreptitious looks. But Shushian's senses were far too sharp. He easily detected their shifting gazes. To him, these people might as well have painted, "We have ulterior motives," on their faces and paraded through the streets. And for a brief moment, he sensed something else odd. Before the thought could fully form, it was interrupted by the blackbird on Schwanmin's shoulder. The bird was utterly fearless. Instead of being alarmed by the funeral procession, it spread its wings and smacked Shushian's shoulder when he got too close. Little beast. Yeah, I just was making sure I was saying it correctly because it was separated. But thank you, Truffle. Surreptitious, sneaky, or suspicious. Shushian glared at it, only to see Xuanmin placidly slap another talisman on it. This one seemed to be for immobilization. The bird stiffened into a wooden board on Xuanmin's shoulder, unmoving. Its beady black gaze was pitiful as it stared at Xuanmin. Shushian felt terribly pleased and stopped pondering the ulterior motives of the procession. The chief diviner and chief ritualist watched as the two men and the bird walked through the parted crowd. Eventually, they passed the last horse and reached the fork in the mountain path ahead. The chief ritualist exhaled softly, already formulating a plan. To avoid hindering the state preceptor, they would pretend to take a different path, continue onward, then circle back by a side route to follow them from an unobtrusive distance. So not getting in their way. That way, they could provide sport if needed. The chief ritualist hadn't finished his exhalation when the slender black-clad man beside the state preceptor turned and smirked at them. The smirk was both breathtakingly beautiful and unnervingly sinister, carrying a chilling edge as it curled the corner of his lips. The chief diviner and chief ritualist stiffened in alarm. I love that Shushion is totally messing with them, and he's absolutely on the wrong track with their motives right now. And that just makes it funny because he's literally beefing with children, or I guess teenagers, because they're not that old. They're teenagers, and he's beefing with them. In the next instant, the sky above the court of imperial sacrifices procession darkened. The faint daylight was swallowed by rolling black clouds, and hundreds of blinding lightning bolts shot down without warning, striking the ground with deafening cracks. Each bolt landed just shy of their toes, forming a cage of thunder and lightning around the entire procession. Subtle. For the first time in their lives, the chief ritualist and his companions experienced the chaos of horses rearing and men tumbling off. The procession dissolved into utter disarray. Every lightning strike was precisely aimed. They never hit, but they were always close enough to force them to dodge away. The lightning showed no signs of stopping, like it could continue endlessly. With their limited abilities, the members of the Court of Imperial Sacrifices were unable to escape this cage. As the chief ritualist struggled to look around in the midst of the chaos, he realized the people he'd intended to follow had already vanished. The blinding lightning made it impossible to see which fork in the road they'd taken. Just when he was about to panic, the chief diviner grabbed his arm. "Don't worry, we'll catch up," she said. Yeah, Shushan is definitely messing with them. Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Ruby, when you say poor kids. Also, hello! How are you doing, Ruby? By the time Shushan and Xuanmin returned to Qingping County, the sky was fully light. Unlike the thunderstorm at the foot of Mount Boji, the sunlight here was warm, a rare comfort in the depths of winter. The county seemed livelier than last time, with more people coming and going in the street, as if they had finally emerged from the shadow of the plague to take a breath. It is pretty funny that Xuanmin didn't interfere. He just let it happen. When the two arrived at the Fang family's back door, the household was already bustling. Herbalists and assistants were spreading medicinal herbs in the garden to dry in the rare sunshine. Beggars bustled about, clumsily but diligently helping. Old Chen and Feng Cheng were checking inventory, one calling out names, while the other marked quantities with a vermilion brush. Jiang Shijing was teaching a group of 7 or 8-year-old children. These were apprentices sent here by various families. Though young, they could already recite the properties of various herbs. Aunt Chen chopped vegetables in the kitchen, with Xing Shi as assisting and occasionally running in and out. The twin brothers were busy in the front hall, while Jiang Xining, who couldn't be exposed to light, stayed indoors proofreading a medical text his sister had copied. Shi Tuzhang sat in a corner, carving small trinkets out of stone. At his feet were a row of thumb-sized rabbits and monkeys, evidence of his idle curiosity. "Glad you're doing good, Ruby." The Fang family's backyard was spacious, but the crowd made it feel cramped. In the past, Shushan would have turned and left the sight of such a scene. One Shi Tuzhang buzzed in his ear was one Shi Tuzhang buzzing in his ear was annoying enough, but a whole crowd? Unbearable. Though not as fastidious as Xuanmin, Shushan was inherently averse to noise. He could be as loud as he wanted, but others couldn't disturb him. Such was his unreasonable logic. Right. Despite that, he leaned against the doorframe. His lazy gaze swept over the yard, and he thought, "This kind of life isn't so bad. For ordinary people, it was probably as perfect as it could get." Xing Shi, emerging from the kitchen, spotted Shushan and Xuanmin by the door. "Ah, Shu Gonzi is back!" she cried out in delight. "Little girl, you're so biased your heart's gone completely sideways. It's practically under your arm," said Shi Tuzhang, teasing from nearby. "Didn't you see the master's figure, too?" Xingxi blushed and waved her hands. No, I just hadn't gotten around to addressing him yet." Shushan is being a cat again. Feel bad for Xingxi. Poor girl has a massive crush. She does, but like he is given he hasn't encouraged it at all. So like girl can have a crush, but like that that's on her. But yeah, she does have a pretty big crush. Shitu Zhang, though still absorbed in his carving, turned. Did you two spend all night tidying up? Did you ever finish? Had I known it'd take so long, I'd have stayed another night to help. Yeah, no, she's also way too young for him. Did say like 16, 14, 15, 16, something around there. Way too young. I mean, not even bringing in the fact that he's implied hundreds of years old. So, yeah. Okay, 16 or 17. Alright. Shitu Zhang, ever the blunt fool, managed to turn Shu Xian's face from pale to green with just one sentence. Yeah, imagine if Shitu Zhang had been there during the steamy scene. He wouldn't have walked out of that building. For a moment, Shu Xian thought he sent Xuanmin's eyes on him. However, when he spun around, Xuanmin was looking down as he stepped calmly into the yard. Shu Xian narrowed his eyes at Shitu Zhang. The dragon did not like the feeling that he'd suddenly grown a weakness, and being poked over and over in his sore spot was driving him mad. The truth was, after all his years of carefree living, he'd never felt such emotional turbulence before. Enough already. Yeah, it would have been really bad for his heart. Heart, body, bones, you know. Zhuxian's expression finally returned to normal. So what if he'd borrowed a hand? So what if he'd indulged himself? That was that. What of it? Shitu Zhang had nearly wilted from being stared at that whole time. Luckily, he was sitting. If he had been standing, he might have turned and fled. He smacked a hand over his own mouth. Should have kept quiet, now you've made him glare at you, he muttered to himself. Not that he knew why such a simple sentence had provoked the temperamental wise one. The others in the yard greeted Shushian and Xuanmin next. Xing Shi, who had been staring at Shushian's face in a daze, suddenly exclaimed and pointed at his now functioning legs. You... Huh? Your legs are better? Shitu Zhang, having learned nothing from his past mistakes, said in surprise. What kind of miracle medicine did you take to recover overnight? I mean, he's a dragon. What do you expect? He's a... Shushian narrowed his eyes again. I suggest you stop talking if you want to stay safe. What did I do wrong this time? Regardless, Shitu Zhang sealed his lips. Shitu Zhang wasn't the only one oblivious to the implications of overnight. In no time, the entire Fang household's attention was on Shushian's amazing recovery, and they bombarded him with questions. Overnight this, overnight that. Shushian almost felt like these people were here to collect a debt for him. From him. All these mouths. Fortunately, before he had to endure much more, he felt someone grasp his wrist gently but firmly. His legs have just recovered. He needs a few more hours of quiet cultivation to fully recuperate, Xuanmin interjected. The crowd paused, then quickly agreed. The master's right. He should rest and recover properly. Without another word, Xuanmin guided Shushian by the wrist into their shared room and closed the door behind them. The door shut out the noise from the rest of the house. This thin wooden barrier was miraculous. Once closed, it created a separate world. Shushian's gaze dropped to the hand still holding his wrist. The door was shut, yet Xuanmin hadn't let go. He did eventually, after which he walked to the table and pulled out a chair. On the way back, your steps were unsteady and your pulse was sluggish. Your recovery was rushed. You should rest and recuperate further. So the delayed release was just to check my condition? Shushian raised an eyebrow and averted his gaze. He stopped looking at Xuanmin and instead fiddled with the string of copper coins he'd yet to return, then brushed past the table Xuanmin was seated at to perch on the bed. Would that technically be a face count, or just because he glanced? Up to you, Truffle. What Xuanmin said wasn't untrue. Shushan knew this. His actual spine had yet to fully recover. His current mobility relied entirely on the threads condensed from the copper coins. A substitute was just a substitute. All right, I'll count it. 16. It couldn't last forever. Already, it felt unstable. If he didn't replenish it with spiritual energy soon, the threads might snap and he'd be paralyzed again. So he didn't dawdle and started to meditate with the copper coins. At first, the spiritual energy flowing through the coins circulated through his meridians as usual, nourishing the threads connecting his broken bones and encouraging their fractured ends to grow a little. Before long, another stream of warm spiritual energy flowed through the coins into his bones and tendons, merging with the original stream to soothe his injuries. Shushan cracked an eye open and saw that Xuanmin had also closed his eyes, one hand forming a Buddhist mudra as if cultivating something. Clearly, the second stream of energy had come from him. Shushan closed his eyes again and focused on guiding both his and Xuanmin's energy through the coins over and over. Well, that's sweet. He's helping him out. After a little while, the copper coins in Shushan's hand trembled. Though they made no sound, metallic resonance traveled from his fingers to his bones and into his mind, as if something had clicked open. He froze for a moment before realizing what had happened. Another of the 5 coins' restrictions had been lifted. For an instant, he felt that with the lifting of the restriction, the connection between the coins and his body had grown stronger. As the coins hummed and vibrated, his mind seemed to vibrate along with them, pulling him uncontrollably into a dreamlike state. Though it was less a dream and more a series of fragments, so blurry their outlines were barely discernible, like fish surfacing briefly in a pond before vanishing again. He saw someone pacing in front of him. His perspective was strange. He couldn't see the person's torso, only the hem of their robe sweeping past like clouds. He opened his mouth slightly, as if uttering a brief word, or perhaps just a name. Then he was seated at a desk somewhere, but he couldn't see what was on it. A black shadow fell beside his hand, and he seemed to twitch his fingers toward it. Next, he held something that looked like a demon mask, a swirl of red and black, its features indistinct. Just as Shushan was struggling to make sense of these fragments, he saw one last scene. A child with a blurred face standing before him. He bent down and reached out to the child. What gave him pause was that his sleeve was white, spotlessly white. The child looked up at him. "Who are you? Who are you?" Their voices were blurred and indistinct, youthful yet timid. Just as he was about to answer, he caught sight of his outstretched hand. On the side of his ring finger's knuckle was a tiny mole. Though the dream was hazy, the mole stood out against his pale, slender finger. The shock of recognition jolted him awake. Shushan's eyes flew open. He stared at the figure by the table. Night had fallen without Shushan noticing, leaving the room dark. The faint glow of lanterns outside outlined Xuanmin's silhouette. "Bald donkey," Shushan murmured, frowning. 92. Xuanmin made a sound of acknowledgement. His voice carried a faint trace of exhaustion, as if he had also just emerged out of a taxing state. From where Shu Xian sat, he saw Xuan Min raise a hand to touch his neck. Though the room was too dark to see any details, Shu Xian remembered. On the knuckle of Xuan Min's ring finger was a small mole, exactly like the one in the dream. Shu Xian had meant to tell Xuan Min about the dream, but seeing him touch his neck changed his mind. Another thought struck Xuan Min, or Shu Xian. If that had just been a coincidental dream, he would have been fine talking about it. But what if it hadn't been a dream? There was an inexplicable connection between him and Xuan Min's copper coins. Name drop. One that could transfer the effects of dragon saliva. Could it also transfer other things? Like memories? If he wasn't mistaken, each time a coin's restriction was lifted, Xuan Min regained some memories. During their earlier cultivation, one coin's restriction had been broken. What he'd seen, could they have been fragments of Xuan Min's memories? The connection was limited, making everything blurred, as if viewed from across a river. If they were memories, Shu Xian couldn't just outright ask about them. Xuan Min volunteered the information. Let me start that over. Xuan Min volunteering the information was one thing, but Shu Xian seeing it without his knowledge was another. Shu Xian decided to wait until Xuan Min felt better before having a proper talk. For now, it was best not to use the coins recklessly, lest the connection deepen further. When Xuan Min heard Shu Xian call his name but say nothing more, he turned. What is it? His voice sounded better, like he'd mostly recovered. I'll return the coins for now. I don't need them anymore, Shu Xian said. He stood with a stretch, then placed the coins in Xuan Min's hand. Out of habit, he'd hooked his finger through the coin string, so when he placed them in Xuan Min's palm, his finger was still caught in the loop. In the darkness, it almost seemed as if their hands were linked by that slender cord. For a moment, as if bewitched, Shu Xian did not pull away, and neither did Xuan Min. Did they hand fast? Ooh! Is that the implication? Did they just hand fast each other? After a long pause, Shu Xian twitched his finger, not to free it, but to tug lightly on the string. Gazing down at Xuan Min, he murmured, You've... The sound of knocking suddenly echoed. A slender, frail figure was outlined through the paper panel door. Lunian Shi's dry voice came through. Get up. The master of the house is celebrating his birthday. How could you sleep so late? Shu Xian's fingers loosened, releasing the thin string. I almost forgot the date. Jiang Shi Jing invited us to a feast today. Let's go. He and Xuan Min were esteemed guests in the eyes of the Fang family. Lunian Shi was just the first to seek them out. As soon as Shu Xian opened the door, the entire Fang household, young and old, gathered around, ushering and inviting him and Xuan Min to the guest hall. Seeing the table laden with delicacies rivaling those of fine restaurants, Shu Xian understood what Aunt Chen had been busy with, wielding her cleaver early in the morning. This was for a birthday celebration, but it wasn't a milestone year. Jian Shijing and Fang Chen had merely used the occasion to gather everyone for a warm familial feast. With no outsiders present, the meal was lively and enjoyable. The first half was somewhat restrained by etiquette, but in the latter half, the twin brothers went wild and the atmosphere became boisterous. Led by the Chen brothers, the group shamelessly teased Feng Chang and Jiang Shijing before turning their mischief on Uncle and Aunt Chen. Eventually, Aunt Chen scolded the two brothers and chased them back to their seats. Shameless! Eat your food! If you don't settle down, I'll feed you pig slop tomorrow, she said, giving them a thorough dressing down. Feng Chang, however, poured a small cup of wine, shooed away the rowdy youngsters, and smiled. Careful to hold back his sleeve, he lifted his cup to Jiang Shijing. Jiang Shijing raised a finger in warning. Just one cup. Then, with a suppressed smile, she also lifted a small Celadon wine cup. Aunt Chen's the real one. Absolutely, she's the best. So, I definitely agree with you, Truffle. I also love Aunt Chen. That's fine. If I drink 1 cup a year, I can still drink 80 more, Feng Cheng said solemnly. You'll be a monster by then, Jiang Shijing laughed helplessly. Jiang Xining, the ghost who couldn't eat ordinary food, also smiled, his eyes crinkling. Aw. Lazily watching the lively scene, Shu Xian swirled his wine cup. When he noticed something on Feng Cheng's and Jiang Shijing's exposed wrists, his eyes lingered. Feng Cheng's wrist bore a faint mark, like one left by tight rope, and it looked oddly familiar. Jiang Shijing's wrist also held a similar faint trace. Jiang Xining happened to turn and notice Shu Xian staring. He leaned over. What are you looking at? Shu Xian gestured with his chin. Oh, Jiang Xining said, understanding. That mark on my brother-in-law's wrist is a birthmark. He's had it since he was born. My sister's is from an accidental bump when she was little. It's actually from the first time she met him. The mark never faded, so it looks like they were destined to be. Chushian responded, arching one eyebrow as he sipped his wine. Maybe it's a mark from a past life. The lonely soul who'd wandered that desert of corpses had gotten his wish. He'd found the person he sought and was living the most ordinary and joyful of lives. 80 is too few. Maybe the count can continue in the next life, Feng Cheng said. He tapped his cup lightly against Jiang Shijing's. Consider this a promise. Don't go back on it 100 years from now. With that, he downed the cup in one gulp. Some connections in this world defied explanation. Sometimes the connections didn't even have a clear beginning, yet they tugged at the heartstrings, seeping into the bones, and endured from youth to old age, unbroken for a century, unchanged for 3 lifetimes. Shushan swallowed his wine, a smirk playing on his lips. He glanced to his side and saw Xuanmin looking back. Then he lifted his teacup for a sip. And yes, Feng Chang's such a wife guy. And he might have literally been a wife guy for 2 lifetimes. Impressive. Ooh-hoo-hoo. We're on arc 5. Arc 5, no regrets. I'm just gonna finish this. All right. 56. It is very impressive. I think it's also very sweet. It's kind of a cool connection, circling back. I do like how this author does that, where they circle back around. But yeah. That's adorable. But yes. Chapter 31, Finger Mole. I get where it's coming from, but that's still such a funny title for the chapter. Pardon me. Outside the southwestern corner of Qingping County's city walls past Mount Boji, there was an ancient river that flowed straight into the great Yangtze River, locally known as Yiya Moor. This river had been the subject of countless legends in Qingping since ancient times. It was said to house a river god who blessed the surrounding farmland with favorable weather and bountiful fish. There are even tales of people who tried to fill the river to build houses only to see their constructions collapse repeatedly. Over time, the stories grew more fantastical, and the locals built a temple to the river god by the riverbank for worship and offerings, seeking peace of mind. But Yeya, Wild Ducks Moor, was still a wild and desolate place, true to its name. While the temple saw occasional visitors during the day, it was deserted at night and a perfect setting for ghostly tales, dark and silent. On this night, unlike most, the river god temple was lit by candles deep into the evening. 2 oil lamps flickered faintly at the feet of the stone statue of the river god, casting a dim yellow glow over the room. 2 figures sat on the soft cushions inside, a somewhat plump, middle-aged man and a thin, frail-looking boy. A young monk in snow-white robes stood by the candles. Using the light, he smoothed out a yellow sheet of paper on the incense table. As he held back his sleeve, he dipped his brush in ink and wrote a few characters on the paper. Jiang Xining, year of Bing Yin, 7th day of the 8th month. On an old tree by the temple gate, a man in black sat on a thick, gnarled branch. He leaned against the trunk with one knee bent and the other dangling lazily. His pale face was warmed by the faint light from the temple, softening the sharp contours of his handsome features and lending him an uncharacteristically gentle air. It was Shushan. That night, the Fang household had stayed up unusually late. Young and old alike had indulged in a bit of wine, then drifted into a tipsy slumber. Shushan and the others had left after everyone had gone to bed. Aren't you afraid your sister will scold you every time she burns paper offerings for you in the future? Shushan rested his elbow on his knee, idly toying with the leaf hanging near his hand. Jiang Xining stood under the tree and shook his head as he looked up at Shushan. My sister has a soft heart. I can't bear to see her sad. Shushan plucked 2 leaves and began folding them in his hands. Yet you could bear to leave without saying goodbye. If I didn't leave at night, I'd never get away during the day. If she cried in front of me, I'd be helpless. Jiang Xining smiled. Brief pain is better than prolonged pain. I had to leave eventually. I left her a letter. Shushan nodded. Fair enough. She's your sister, not mine. He tilted his head and studied the frail scholar under the tree. Are you sure about this? There's no turning back. Yes. My parents have moved on and my sister is doing well. I have no regrets left. It's time to go. A proper ghost shouldn't linger in the mortal world. Indeed, lingering too long made reincarnation difficult, and that was no good. All feasts must come to an end. Jiang Xining looked down at his hands and body, then turned to scan the faces of those who had traveled with him to the temple. I think that's also a popular line in Heaven Officials' Blessings, right? Jiang Xining is such a cinnamon roll. He really is, Ruby. Finally, his gaze settled on Shushan. The 3 years he had spent drifting in the ruins of the Jiang family clinic seemed like a fleeting dream. already fading from memory. But he remembered vividly the moment he had looked up from the tall weeds in the corner of the house and seen the pale black robed young man whose striking features exuded arrogance. Since then, Jiang Xining had gained a proper body, found his parents' shattered souls, traveled far across the river, written a long letter, and properly bidden farewell to his sister. It's just occurred to me, Jiang Xining said to Shushan. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you. Shushan scoffed. For what? There was too much to thank him for. Far more than a few words can convey. Jiang Xining simply smiled. Xuanmin looked over from inside the temple and nodded at Jiang Xining before lighting the folded yellow paper in his hand. A long incense stick smoldered amid the flames. The yellow paper slowly burned to ash, and the incense dwindled section by section. Jiang Xining's figure grew fainter. In the thin haze of smoke, he bowed to Xuanmin, then turned and clasped his hands in a salute to Shushan. Shushan watched the ghost's fading outline, his narrowed eyes a little unfocused. Getting sentimental all of a sudden? Trying to butter me up so I'll remember to burn you some paper money later? No need to burn me paper money. I wouldn't be able to repay you anyway. Jiang Xining just wanted to borrow the temple's incense smoke to wish everyone a lifetime of peace. After all, this farewell was his last. The last section of incense ash fell, and Jiang Xining's figure vanished completely. Shushan stared at the spot where Jiang Xining had disappeared. For a moment... Shushan stared at the spot where Jiang Xining had disappeared for a moment before dropping down from the tree. His black robes fluttered and settled with a soundless brush over the grass as he landed. He walked to the temple entrance but didn't step inside. Watching Xuanmin adjust the candle wick by the incense table, he felt a strange, inexplicable pang of regret stirring in his chest. Xuanmin glanced at Shushan in the candlelight before looking away. Calmly, he folded the talisman paper holding the ashes of the yellow paper and incense, then swept his sleeve over it. A flame from the candle stand landed on the folded paper, transforming it into a simple river lantern. Holding the lantern, Xuanmin strode toward Shushan. The temple floor was slightly raised from the ground. Xuanmin paused at the threshold and handed the lantern to Shushan. His serene eyes met Shushan's until they quickly flickered away. This river is called Ping'an, peace. It could soothe wandering souls and guide lost ghosts. Shushan took the lantern and studied Xuanmin for a few seconds. Suddenly, Xuanmin reached out and touched the side of Shushan's face. Yep, I was getting there. Wanted to finish the page. Aww. Jiang Xining. Sweet boy. He's so precious. He's got such a sweet smile. Like you just want to give him a hug and a cookie. Yeah, he looks a little sad, but mostly happy. I agree. He looks content. Yeah, the good do die young. The warmth of his fingers made Shushan's eyes waver, but the touch was gone as soon as it came. A dead leaf, Xuan Min said flatly. He crushed the withered leaf he had plucked from Shushan's temple into dust and scattered it on the soil by the door. I'm sure it was the dead leaf that you were picking up. Shushan lowered his gaze. Still holding the lantern, he walked to the riverbank, then set the lantern afloat on the ancient waters. The tiny flame drifted away with the current, as if escorting the departed to the other shore. Abruptly, Shushan realized what his regret had been about. Watching Jiang Xining vanish had stirred a rare emotion in him, the sense of sudden absence. Though Jiang Xining had never been loud or bothersome, his disappearance made the surroundings feel emptier, quieter. All reverie must come to an end. Nothing was eternal. Given Shushan's near immortality, he would inevitably watch others grow old and pass away, never to meet again, including Xuan Min. Well, with some of the things that people have been saying, he might also be some kind of immortal, just with all the I've never seen his face age things that people have been saying, so you never know. Shushan frowned, finding the thought unbearably unpleasant. Now that was a sensation beyond mere regret. Meanwhile, atop a low hill south of the river temple, a group of people sat quietly in the night, resting and recuperating. In the faint moonlight, their white robes were tattered and their appearances disheveled, as if they had just escaped a dire predicament. It's kind of proven not just on writing. This group was none other than the party from the Court of Imperial Sacrifices who had been trapped by Shushan's lightning cage at the foot of Mount Boji. They were resting on the mountain's top, but not a single lantern was lit among them. It was as if they were deliberately hiding their presence. Are you sure that's them? The chief ritualist, having removed his mask for once, smoothed his hair and nodded toward a distant glimmer of light in the wilderness. Absolutely, the chief diviner replied. From their vantage point, they could barely make out the faint glow of the river temple and couldn't confirm who was there. All their information came from the chief diviner's divinations. Though they had been outmaneuvered the previous night, the chief diviner's predictions were rarely wrong. If she was certain, the chief ritualist could relax a bit. But the chief ritualist fiddled with the edge of his mask. I still have some doubts. The chief diviner turned to him. What? We were flustered earlier and overlooked something. When we met the state preceptor at the foot of Mount Boji and bowed to greet him, we received his letter. The chief ritualist frowned. Did you see him send it? Shushan really scared those poor people, right? I think it's interesting that it took them this long to realize the inconsistency about the letter. They had witnessed the state preceptor sending letters twice before. It was said that the moment he burned the letter, the recipient would receive it almost instantly, so there was no chance of a delay. At the time, the chief ritualist hadn't dared lift his head, let alone see the state preceptor burn anything. Maybe he burned it just before rounding the mountain bend, and we received it after he appeared, the chief diviner speculated. She added firmly, There's no need to doubt. That was definitely the state preceptor. When he left, I made sure to look at his fingers. The chief ritualist blinked. His fingers? Though members of the Court of Imperial Sacrifices had more opportunities to see the state preceptor than most, even those who had grown up in the temple since childhood rarely got close to him. He disliked having people near him. Few knew the finer details of his appearance, such as state preceptor. She had been 7, a scrawny, malnourished child. Her family was poor, her father long dead, and her mother gravely ill on the verge of passing. Kneeling by the bed in their dilapidated home, weeping in the cold wind and rain, she had been startled when a monk knocked on the door. That had been her first glimpse of the state preceptor. Tall, dressed in pristine white robes, his silver mask obscuring his face. From her vantage point, she could only see his sharp jawline. Then he bent down and extended a hand to her. His hand was beautiful, perfectly proportioned, and so clean it seemed untouched by any impurity. Despite his silver mask, she felt certain he was the most beautiful person she would ever see. Her tears had stopped. Despite his silver mask, she felt certain he was the most beautiful person she would ever see. Her tears had stopped in her shock. Peering up at him, she'd asked, "Who are you?" His voice had been deep and soothing, instantly calming her. "This humble monk goes by the Dharma name Tong Dang. I've come to take you to the court of imperial sacrifices." She had stared at that slender, elegant hand and nodded dazedly before she processed his words. From then on, her life had taken a different path. After the many events she'd witnessed in the years that followed, her impression of the state preceptor had diverged sharply from that first awestruck encounter. Now it was dominated more by reverence and caution than admiration. But she still remembered every detail of that childhood meeting. She would remember it for the rest of her life. And yes, I think you might be right, Truffle, of that might have been what Shushan saw in the copper coin flashback. Good connection. Seeing her lost in thought, the chief ritualist pressed her. What about the state preceptor's fingers? There's a tiny mole on the side of his ring finger's knuckle, the chief diviner said, returning to the present. I saw it when I first met him and never forgot it. At Mount Boji, I made sure to look for it. I'm certain there's no mistake. It's him. Of course. To her surprise, instead of dispelling his doubts, the chief ritualist sucked in a sharp breath and frowned. That can't be right. A few years ago, when I went to the Tianji Institute to report, remember? The state preceptor was playing chess in the pavilion. I stood nearby and, for some reason I can't recall now, took a good look at his hands. Paused. Wait, I remember. You'd been talking about palmistry and bone reading, so I secretly studied his fingers. I'm certain he didn't have a single mole. Did he get bit again? No, because... Interesting. The chief diviner frowned. And maybe you missed the ring finger? The mole is very small and easy to overlook. That or there's multiple, which, I mean, there was speculation of that at the beginning of the book. Sometimes he appeared old, sometimes he was young. I mean, it would make sense at this point. Impossible. The chief ritualist shook his head. I examined every finger, both hands, without missing a single one. How could I analyze bone structure otherwise? I was bold enough to look, and my heart was pounding afterwards, so there's no way I misremembered. What about you? Are you sure? It was so long ago, maybe your memory is a bit fuzzy. I'm absolutely certain. The chief diviner gripped her mask tighter. Besides, if I were mistaken, how could I have seen the same mole on the state preceptor's hand at Mount Boji? Such a precise coincidence was too unlikely. The two stared at each other, brows furrowed, expressions grave. Had the moonlight been brighter, it would have revealed the deep-seated alarm in their eyes. They seemed to have stumbled upon a shocking truth. The state preceptor they'd both seen had conflicting features. The chance of one of them being wrong had also been eliminated, so only one conclusion remained. There wasn't one state preceptor, but two. For a moment they forgot to breathe, their voices lost. Dun dun dun. Dude, you were like 6 feet away. I mean, they were also kind of looking down, so. There wasn't one state preceptor, but two. For a moment, they forgot to breathe, their voices lost. A good while later, the chief ritualist finally spoke, his voice straining like someone had their hands around his throat. Could there be the slightest chance that the state preceptor has been replaced by an impostor? He swallowed nervously as he spoke, for the mere thought of this was terrifying. Do you really think so? This is the state preceptor we're talking about. To the chief diviner, the state preceptor had always occupied a divine, untouchable position. She rejected the idea right away. How could anyone impersonate him? And who would dare? The chief ritualist held his breath, thinking it over, then exhaled heavily. You're right. The state preceptor couldn't possibly be impersonated. Neither the Court of Imperial Sacrifices nor Tianji Institute are places that just anyone can infiltrate. If it were an insider, even less likely. You and I are among the most senior in the Court of Imperial Sacrifices. Would you dare impersonate the state preceptor? The chief diviner retorted. The chief ritualist waved his hands frantically, as if fending off a blade. No! I wouldn't dare even if I had 8 times the guts. Exactly. The chief diviner frowned. The possibility of an impostor is almost negligible. The chief ritualist's expression shifted to stunned as he realized the implications. You mean the state preceptor allowed it? Or even orchestrated it himself? Why would the state preceptor do such a thing? That they couldn't fathom. The state preceptor never explained his actions. In fact, he rarely spoke at all. In the over 10 years the chief diviner and chief ritualist had been at the Court of Imperial Sacrifices, they could count on one hand the number of times they had heard him speak. Apart from his occasional surprise inspections of the temple and the annual pilgrimage to Mount Tai for the celestial rites, the state preceptor seldom left the Tianji Institute. He was like a reclusive sage, albeit one who lived within the imperial court. When he had orders, he usually sent them directly via letters. The Court of Imperial Sacrifices answered directly to him. Typically, if there were matters requiring their involvement, whether from the common folk or the court, the state preceptor would issue commands. But as far as the chief diviner and chief ritualist knew, the state preceptor's reach extended beyond just the Court of Imperial Sacrifices. Sometimes, when they went to report to him, they would see him burning letters, yet no one in the temple would receive any orders afterward. Clearly, the state preceptor had covert operations beside his known personnel. But this was none of their concern. Aside from members of the Court of Imperial Sacrifices, there were gifted individuals who preferred to remain in the shadows, unaffiliated with the court. The state preceptor's behavior seemed normal to the chief ritualist and the chief diviner, and it wasn't something they were in any position to question anyway. The entire Court of Imperial Sacrifices, and indeed most of the court, including the Emperor himself, knew the state preceptor was eccentric, unpredictable, and inscrutable. geniuses often had quirks, and given that the state preceptor had outlasted multiple reigns, even the emperor treated him with deference. His abilities were unmatched, so who would dare question him? Moreover, though the state preceptor was capricious, he wasn't domineering. He rarely involved himself in matters unrelated to him. Thus, even when his orders were perplexing, others in the court would comply without asking why. So, capricious is I wouldn't say temperamental, but prone to his whims, I guess. I wouldn't say standoffish, but just like set in his own ways. Ah, the chief ritualist suddenly gasped. Do you recall the arrest warrants the state preceptor ordered the local authorities to distribute? Yes. The notices bore the likeness of a monk somewhat resembling the state preceptor. I was puzzled when I saw them and asked for more information, the chief diviner said. The vice minister said he didn't know the state preceptor's purpose, but he'd heard that many years ago, before he joined the court of imperial sacrifices, similar warrants had been issued. At their time, there were rumors that the state preceptor was, she paused, lowering her voice, about to pass away. The public had their own theories about the warrants, which muddied the rumors. In truth, the state preceptor had been in poor health and wasn't at the Tianji Institute. He reportedly disappeared for over a month, but then reappeared in his usual state. I assumed this was a similar situation given his seclusion. The junior minister told me not to pry, and the state preceptor later explicitly forbid the court of imperial sacrifices from getting involved, so I dropped it. I'm counting that as a wanted poster count just because they are discussing it, so that's at 10. The chief ritualist pondered this. Just what if one of the two we've seen left the court, he whispered, and the other disapproved, hence the warrants to track him down? The chief diviner finished. But if it were just to obscure the rumors, for some simple reason, why bypass the court of imperial sacrifices? He interrupted, feeling they were on to something. He had the local authorities issue the warrants, but explicitly barred us from involvement. Why? We've never dared disobey him. It's second nature by now, but think about it. Arrest warrants aren't outside our purview. If it were the state preceptor's order, we could have handled it. Unless he didn't want us to encounter something or someone through the warrants. You mean if he's searching for the other state preceptor, outsiders who've never met him would treat it as a routine warrant and report the sightings through normal means? But if we saw him, the scene at Mount Boji was proof enough of what would happen. They fell silent, staring blankly at the distant glimmer of the river temple. If most of their speculations were true, then the state preceptor they were following was the one who had left the court, while the one at Famen Temple had bypassed the court of imperial sacrifices to have the local authorities search for the fugitive. I love that they're calling him the fugitive now. That's funny. Yubai, what should we do? The chief ritualist suddenly asked. The name Yubai gave the chief diviner pause. When they'd first been brought to the court of imperial sacrifices, they had all been around 7 or 8 years old, some even younger, and mostly from impoverished families. Common folk gave their children crude nicknames, believing it would help them survive. Names with meanings like cat, dog, 6 tails, or 7 pounds. Nothing decent. Thus, upon entering the temple, each was given a more elegant name based on a color. The chief diviner had been called Yubai, Moon White. The chief ritualist, Yuan Ching, Original Blue. But it had been years since anyone had used those names. Hearing it now, the chief diviner knew the chief ritualist was truly at a loss. Let's keep following, the chief diviner said, recalling the sharp jawline and soothing voice of the state preceptor she had met all those years ago. We cannot spend our lives obeying orders blindly. I want to know if the one I'm following is the one I choose to follow. The chief ritualist was silent for a moment, then nodded. He sighed, glancing at the younger temple members behind them, and brushed the dust from his robes. Then let's follow. At least we have some skills. We won't lose them, too. Before he could finish, the chief ritualist halted. A clear, resonant cry rang out from the direction of the river temple, as refreshing as a spring breeze, as bright as the moon, and as soul-stirring as a divine revelation. A long shadow soared into the sky from the temple, piercing the clouds. Then a gust of wind arose. The crescent moon still hung in the sky. But thunder rumbled. The long shadow twisted and turned high above until it vanished without a trace. That had been a dragon? The chief diviner, the chief ritualist, and the 100 members from the Court of Imperial Sacrifices stood dumbfounded on the mountaintop, craning their necks like a flock of startled quails. Witnessing a living dragon whisk past would leave anyone speechless. The chief ritualist's mind blanked. After a long pause, he looked toward the river temple. The faint light there had been extinguished. Clearly, the place was now empty. The group remained dumbfounded until a realization struck them. Sounding like his soul had just left his body, the chief ritualist mumbled, Did the state preceptor just ride a dragon into the heavens? Seems so, replied the chief diviner, equally shell-shocked. The chief ritualist was left speechless. And how the hell are we supposed to follow that? Alright, we got one more chapter. For a second, I thought they would mistake him for the dragon. Like, add that extra element of mysticism to it. Oh, my back is so itchy for some reason. I don't think I burned it, so... Alright. Alright, chapter 32, Shop of Walking Corpses. 2 others were just as devastated as the people from the Court of Imperial Sacrifices. Xu Tuzhang and Lu Nianqi, who were each dangling from a dragon's claw. Yeah, those poor kids, I agree. Xu Tuzhang hadn't just been carving random stones at the Fang residence. He had actually done some practical work. He figured that the Fang family's herb gatherers, who often traveled out, would be familiar with the surrounding mountains. While Xu Xian and Xuanmin were away, he had asked them for information. More zoomies! He remembered the landscape around the mountain where he'd been blindfolded and taken, so he described it in detail to the herb gatherers. Fortunately, they actually had some guesses. There were 2 places where one could see the river, as he had described, Mount Yunshi and Mount Lianjiang. These two mountains were located between Anqing Prefecture and Wuchang Prefecture, not too far from Qingping County, where they'd been staying. At least by Shushian's definition of not too far. Since Shi Zhang had managed to dig up a piece of dragon bone, there might be chance. Oh no. Since Shi Zhang had managed to dig up a piece of dragon bone there by chance, Shushian figured there might be some other fragments left behind. Since they were already heading to Langshou, which was in the same direction, it wouldn't hurt to stop by those two mountains and take a look. Shu Xian was the type to act before speaking, and he gave Shi Tuzhang and Lu Nianqi no time to prepare after he'd made his decision. He simply grabbed one in each paw and soared into the sky. Such a bold move was something only Xuanmin could handle. Anyone else would have been left half dead from fright. The four of them soon landed on Mount Yunxi. The moment Shi Tuzhang's feet touched the ground, his world spun around him. He collapsed onto the ground, muttering and slurring as he patted his robe. Thank goodness. Thank goodness I didn't wet myself. Oh, you poor man. He's going through it. Shu Xian shot him a disgusted glance and scanned the mountainside. Shi Tuzhang lay sprawled on the ground for a long time before he staggered to his feet. As he tried to steady himself, he cast an envious and jealous look at Xuan Min, who was standing absolutely still. Can we make a deal, wise one? Shi Tuzhang asked Shu Xian. Next time, can I ride on your back instead of dangling from your claws? It was so bumpy, I think I'm going to throw up. Do you think just anyone can ride a dragon's back? Shu Xian said with a glare. Xuanmin, who'd started brushing aside branches while holding a paper talisman to detect any unusual spiritual energy in the area, paused at these words. Shu Xian noticed something had been off about his phrasing. When he looked up, he caught Xuanmin's gaze. Shu Xian spun on his heel, turned his back to Xuanmin, and snapped at Shi Tuzhang. Piss off! Shi Tuzhang blinked. Negotiations had failed, so he had no choice but to obediently get to work. He picked a few spots, stood on a high rock, and scanned the surroundings in all directions before shaking his head. It's not this mountain. We have to go. Before he could finish his sentence, he and Lu Nianqi were once again grabbed by the mighty Shu Xian. Without any time to make a face of despair, Shi Tuzhang found himself soaring through the sky in the howling wind again. Oh, ancestors above, save me! Next time, the landing was even more dramatic. The moment Shu Xian's feet touched the ground of Mount Lianjiang, the entire mountain trembled twice. The familiar sense of resonance returned. This is the place! Shu Xian sounded absolutely certain. The more he recovered, the stronger his connection with his bones in the mountains became. This tremor was far more violent than any so far. Shi Tuzhang and Lu Nianqi, already dizzy from flying, stumbled and fell. The earthquake got so bad that Shi Tuzhang started to roll downhill. Fortunately, Xuanmin reached out and grabbed him before he could go far. Just sit, he said bluntly to the two of them. With the mountain shaking like this, it was a miracle it hadn't collapsed. Staying upright was out of the question. Shi Tuzhang pulled the near-blind Lu Nianqi over, and the two of them collapsed by an old tree at the summit. They desperately clung to its trunk to avoid being tossed off the mountain. Shu Xian only needed to flex his fingers a fraction to sense that something was wrong with the dragon bones. Felt as though some force underground was suppressing them, making them difficult to extract. It was like reaching for an object that should have been easy to grasp, only to find it cumbersome, as if something was weighing it down. If the resistance when retrieving the bone in Wen village had felt like the force of 1,000 pounds. This time it was like two mount ties were pressed on top. Shushan frowned, then sensed someone approaching and turned. As expected, it was Xuan Min. Perhaps this was just not Shushan's year. Ever since he'd had his tendons and bones ripped out, nothing had gone smoothly. Hello, Esper Lady, welcome! How are you doing tonight? We are on our last chapter for tonight. We just kind of started it. We ended up setting Jiang Xineng free. So there was a very, very sweet photo. Melancholic photo. Bittersweet. Sweet boy. Because his business was finished, and so he went on his way. But we also had a scene between the chief diviner and chief ritualist, where they came to the conclusion that there might actually be two perceptors, and they decided to try to continue following Xuan Min. Except Xuan Min just swanned off on Xuxian's back along with Lu Nianqi and Shi Tu Sheng. Yeah. So, yeah, that's basically where we are. We're now searching two different mountains, and have arrived at the second one where there's dragon bone resonance. So, yeah. Yeah, no, they were like, what do you mean there's moles on his fingers? There weren't moles on his fingers. And they were like, wait a minute. Are there two state perceptors? Oh my gosh, there's two state perceptors. What do we do with this knowledge? But yeah. So that's kind of where we are. If the resistance when retrieving the bone in one village had felt like the force of 1,000 pounds, this time it was like two mount ties were pressed on top. Shushan frowned, then sensed someone approaching and turned. As expected, it was Xuan Min. Of course. Perhaps this was just not Shushan's year. Ever since he had had his tendons and bones ripped out, nothing had gone smoothly. I mean, that's a pretty big upset in your life. Like, I'd imagine that would definitely put a wrinkle in your year in review. Yeah, Shushan also menaced them with a lightning cage, which they eventually escaped, but definitely caused them some issues, especially in regarding to their horses freaking out. Understandably. They weren't actually injured, they caused pandemonium. There were very few people in the world capable of helping him, and he had long grown accustomed to figuring things out on his own. He preferred action over words, force over diplomacy. After all, he feared nothing. But after meeting Xuan Min, he'd realized that having someone lend a hand at critical moments could save him a lot of trouble. He had thought that, given his dislike of others interfering and his reluctance to owe favors, he wouldn't appreciate being helped. In reality, when Xuan Min repeatedly stepped in, Xuxian found it not that bad. Maybe it was because Xuan Min's timing was always impeccable, or maybe Xuxian's temper had mellowed a bit after he became a paraplegic. Whatever the case, he'd actually grown accustomed to Xuan Min's involvement, to the point where he left a space for him. Like right now, when Xuan Min drew out his copper coins and helped to clear away all other obstacles, that empty space was filled. This was the first time Shushan had been distracted while retrieving his bones. The shuddering mountain was like a ferocious beast, struggling to break free, only to be coldly and forcefully pinned down by Xuan Min. Yet as the bones were about to emerge from the soil, they halted for a second. Xuan Min's low voice sounded in Shushan's ear. "Don't let up." He grasped Shushan's hand, and a surge of warm spiritual energy poured into his palm through the thin layer of skin. The bones buried in the mountain stirred. "Oh, we got another picture so soon?" Shushan's fingers twitched in Xuanmin's grip before he snapped back to attention and increased his strength. With a burst of wind and quake so violent that even the old trees nearby nearly toppled, several pieces of pale bones broke free from the soil and shot toward Shushan. One after another, they turned to powder upon reaching his outstretched hand and merged into his body. Before Shushan could begin to process his restored bones, something extraordinary happened on Mount Lianjiang. 4 thread-like strands resembling spider silk shot from the mountain at incredible speed, each heading in a different direction. 3 to the east, and 1 alone to the west. The traces vanished in the blink of an eye, evaporating into the night like mist, leaving no further movement. Shushan frowned and scanned the area, but couldn't immediately discern what these fleeting threads had been. "Did you get them? Is it finally done shaking? Can I let go now?" Shi Tuzhang asked in rapid succession. His face was full of relief after his narrow brush with death, but he didn't let go of the tree he was clinging to. "Why are you two just standing there looking all alert?" Shushan's bones had indeed been retrieved, yet his hand remained at his side, clasped in Xuan Min's. Worse, Shushan had somehow hooked one of Xuan Min's fingers through his without noticing. "Are they holding pinkies? Oh my gosh, that'd be so cute. Hi, Momar's Rover. So we are actually about to be at a picture. So give me 1 second and then I'll summarize when we get to the picture. How did we end up in this position? Shushan wondered. I can't remember at all. The feeling of their palms and the undersides of their arms pressed together carried an indiscernible intimacy. Whether it was a temporary lapse of reason or something else, Xuan Min found this closeness somewhat enchanting. He was reluctant to move away. He glanced down surreptitiously and studied the sight for a moment. Only then did he withdraw his hand. All right, here's our picture. So, we had, we released Jiang Xining. He finally has been sent off to be reincarnated. It was a very beautiful scene. I'll show you the picture after this one. And then we kind of cut back to the Court of Imperial Sorcerers or whatever. And had an interesting meeting with the Chief Diviner and Chief Ritualist. And so I'll show you the other picture real quick. There you go. I sent him off. So the Chief Diviner, Chief Ritualist had the realization, well, up on the ridge, after getting menaced by lightning from Shushan, that there are actually 2 state perceptors, and they're chasing after one. And so they had that realization. They're like, we're gonna follow him and it's gonna be all right and everything. And then they all ride off on a dragon and they're like, what are we supposed to do about that? And so then we cut back to Shushan and Xuan Min and Lunyan Shi and Shi Tuzhang. And they tried one mountain, it wasn't it. They flew to the next one. There were dragon bones, and then we had this cute moment where they're holding hands, and the bones are reconnecting. So that's where we are now. Okay. Xuan Min hadn't moved earlier. Perhaps he'd been too surprised and hadn't returned to his senses. It wasn't until Shu Xian pulled away that he looked over. When Xuan Min observed someone, his gaze was always light and fleeting. A brief touch or a sweep, rarely lingering. Of course, Momar's rover. Though his eyes usually appeared calm and indifferent, there seemed to be a transcendent moment, almost impossible to catch. Transient, not transcendent, transient, momentary. When they darkened into something unfathomable. The atmosphere between them turned oddly tense, but Shitu Zhang remained oblivious. Isn't he always? He used the tree's trunk to haul himself to his feet as he adjusted to the now stable mountaintop. After pressing his weathered face against the tree bark for a moment, he sighed and began slapping the dirt off his clothes. Lu Nianqi was still sitting cross-legged on the ground. "What's wrong?" Shitu Zhang asked with a nudge. "Don't tell me there's a problem." Lu Nianqi rolled his eyes. "How would I know? I'm blind." Shitu Zhang thought the kid's tone was a bit off. Shu Xian, who had just stepped over, also noticed. He saw the teenager's eyes flicker over his fingers before fixing blankly on empty space like he couldn't see a single thing. "You..." Shu Xian coughed and steered the conversation back on track as he scanned the surroundings from the mountaintop. "What was that just now?" He pointed in 3 directions. "Those things shot off toward these places, right? One went diagonally into the river and disappeared, another went straight across the river, and the third..." When he reached this point, he gave a tight frown, and an idea flashed through his mind. "Huaishou Prefecture, the river's center, Anqing Prefecture," Xuanmin said, as if reading Shu Xian's thoughts. He pointed toward the 3 spots and stated their names firmly. To Shitu Zhang and Lu Nianqi, who had joined the journey midway, not all of these places held significance. But to Shu Xian and Xuanmin, it was a major connection. The Lu family estate, Fentu Island, Wen Village, Shu Xian elaborated. He exchanged a glance with Xuanmin. At the Lu estate in Niangyang County, Huaishou Prefecture, Shu Xian had dug up his true form encased in the gold marble. At the river's heart in the underground tomb on Fentu Island, he had retrieved his first bone. The second bone had been excavated in Wen Village, Anqing Prefecture. Now Mount Lianjiang made the third. Along the way, they had also encountered Shitu Zhang and reclaimed the dragon bone sword he had carved. But since the bone had been picked up from Mount Lianjiang, it counted as part of this location. The silk-like threads had shot out from Mount Lianjiang. That one's gonna bug me. The 3 strands heading east had pointed to where Shu Xian's golden marble and stolen bones had once been buried. As for the one to the west, if they weren't mistaken, it indicated the final destination. "I also saw the silver threads just now. They were very clear," Lu Nianqi said. This statement carried a clear meaning. Due to Lu Shiju's influence, Lu Nianqi's eyes could not register ordinary things, but they were sharp when it came to spirits, energy, or spiritual phenomena. If he saw those spider silk threads clearly, it meant they were one of these 3 things. After a moment of contemplation, Xuanmin offered a guess. A large-scale array. "An array?" Shu Xian asked with a start. It took him a second, but then he understood. The golden marble and some of his bones had been entangled in arrays, like drawing the river to the sea at the Liu residence, or the flow of 100 soldiers at Ventu Island. These situations had pulled their attention, and they overlooked a possibility. What if these arrays were just surface level? What if the burial sites of the golden marble and each piece of Shushan were connected to form a much larger and grander array? Xuanmin's memories were incomplete, so he couldn't immediately identify what kind of grand array this might have been. Some enormous arrays require an awakening array, he ventured after some consideration. Shushan frowned. Awakening array. You need to choose appropriate locations, embedded spiritual artifacts as the anchor, and use the power of the four cardinal directions to complete the true array. Then it can be awakened, Xuanmin explained. Once the true array is completed, the involved spiritual artifacts become irrelevant. It was like propping up a trellis in a courtyard to guide vines upward. Once the vines had climbed high enough and stabilized, the trellis could be removed or left in place. The vines might shift, but they wouldn't fall. Hearing this, Shushan recalled several puzzling points. The sorcerer who'd set up drawing the river to the sea for Scribe Liu had seemed knowledgeable, but then why had he contained a golden marble, the transformed body of a dragon no less, under such a minor array, all for the sake of a petty official like Scribe Liu? The same went for when someone like Shitu Zhang had been able to dig up a dragon bone on Mount Lianjiang. I got it that time. Back in Wen Village, Xu had wondered why the array linked to the dragon bone had been so crude, barely enough to deter rogue sorcerers. That level of array was practically an open invitation to Xu. If Xuanmin's guess was correct, these oddities could be explained, and the increasing tremors when retrieving bones made sense. In the early stages, extracting one or two pieces would have had little impact. As more were removed, it was like dismantling the final supports. There had to be some shift. That means... Shushian's expression grew serious. The large-scale array has already been completed. That was why removing the spiritual artifacts used in the awakening array had become so difficult. Judging by the directions the threads had shot toward, there was still something to the west. It was unclear whether it was part of the awakening array or the true array. Shushan was decisive by nature. Since a direction had been indicated, there was no reason not to investigate. He was about to grab his companions and dig to the skies, but Xuanmin interrupted. Xuanmin placed the copper coins back in Shushan's hand. To avoid unnecessary complications, you should refine the dragon bones you just retrieved here. To be precise, to avoid burning up and becoming disoriented mid-journey, which could lead to unnecessary trouble. Shushan thought this made sense, but as he took the coins, his feelings were complicated. As he'd used them a few times, his connection to the coins, or rather his connection to Xuanmin through the coins, had grown increasingly obvious. If this continued, who knew how entangled they would become? Oh no! More entangled? So terrible! Oh no! That reminded Shushan of something. These coins of yours and the spiritual energy you channeled into my palm earlier. It's so potent, it's practically beyond human ability. Did you take some miracle medicine? Xuanmin had helped before, but the power he'd displayed hadn't been enough to astonish Shushan, perhaps due to the coin's unbroken seals or Xuanmin's incomplete memories. At most, Shushan would have said that Xuanmin was exceptional among mortals. Xuanmin had also studied the land when Shushan had retrieved the bone in Wen Village. However, his attention had been entirely focused on Xuanmin's hand, which had split open from the strain, leaving no room for further thought about the monk's spiritual power. This time, despite the bones in Mount Lianjiang being the hardest to extract yet, and the resulting tremors being that much more violent, Xuanmin had not only stabilized the land, but also lent Xian additional strength. Based on the aftermath in one village, Xuanmin should have at least suffered a split in his hand, if not outright loss of it. Somehow he'd emerged completely unscathed. The contrast between incidents was downright bizarre, and his power was even more astonishing if it was related to the coin seals. If he was this formidable with only 3 of the 5 seals broken, the results would be unimaginable when all 5 were undone. There were very few people in the world who could come to Xuxian's aid, and even fewer who could have done it to the extent Xuanmin had. But Xuxian didn't dwell on it. He'd only asked because he was curious. Xuanmin frowned. To be honest, I have many questions about this as well, but my existing memories don't provide an explanation. He met Xuxian's eyes and lingered there, a rare occurrence. If I remember the reason, I will tell you. The answer was both expected and unexpected. From their previous conversations, Xuxian knew Xuanmin wasn't the type to deliberately evade topics or conceal things. Regardless of how he treated others, he was transparent with Xuxian. So when Xuxian asked the question, he already anticipated this answer. What surprised him was Xuanmin's tone and the look in his eyes. There was an unusual gravity to them. Xuxian was stunned by Xuanmin's eyes. It was like Xuxian's usual carefree self couldn't bear the weight of them. He forgot how to respond for a second. After a second, he looked away and waved a hand with feigned nonchalance. It's fine. No need to be so serious. I was just asking. Without further thought, he grabbed the coins and hurried up a tree, where he could lean against the trunk and refine his newly retrieved dragon bones. His meditation lasted the entire night. I love how they say that like it's a long time when, if you consider it, this is probably the most bone he's retrieved in one instance. And he's like, it took the whole night. And it's like, that's it? Mere mortals like Shitu Zhang and Lunian Qi couldn't compete with Xuxian and Xuanmin's extraordinary constitutions. After flying around all night and enduring the mountain's quakes, they were exhausted. They napped while Xuxian refined his bones. This time, Xuxian had absorbed 3 bone fragments at once. He could feel the broken ends of his bones extending significantly, while the substitute bone threads shortened but grew tougher. They should last longer than before. When Xuxian emerged from his meditation, the first thing he heard was the distant melodious chirping of mountain birds, crisp and refreshing. However, as the last notes faded, another familiar sigh reached his ears. Xuxian raised an eyebrow and opened his eyes to see Xuanmin's black bird circling him in the tree branches, a small cloth bundle clutched in its beak. The bird's upbringing was a mystery, but it was wild by nature. It had chased after them earlier from the hollow in Mount Boji to the village on the sunny side. Xuxian had thought it would cling to Xuanmin, but just before entering the Fang residence, it had flown off. Clearly, it disliked the idea of being confined in a small courtyard. When they set off, Xuxian had scanned the Fang residence but hadn't seen it, so he assumed it was gone for good. Not the case, it seemed. You actually know the way, Xuxian muttered, grabbing the bird and plucking the bundle from its beak. As he untied the knot, he glanced down at the base of the tree where Xuanmin was meditating cross-legged. Hearing the noise above, Xuanmin looked up. In the faint light of dawn, Shushan grinned at him and jerked his chin upward. Morning, your demonic ghost bird went thieving and brought you some pastries. Catch. With that, he loosely retied the bundle and let it drop. Xuanmin tilted his head a little, but caught it neatly. Come down, Xuanmin said, unwrapping the bundle with a frown. Shushan prepared to leap down from the tree, but the aggravated blackbird beat him to the ground. It landed obediently at Xuanmin's feet with a chastised air. Shushan awkwardly retracted his foot, rolled his eyes, and leaned back against the tree. He bent one knee and swung the other leg back and forth lazily. Over the lower eastern hills, he could see the first light of dawn on the horizon. As he glanced down at Xuanmin meditating under the tree with the now docile black bird, he suddenly thought, living like this wouldn't be too bad. Not too noisy, not too lonely. Every empty space was filled just right. If every dawn were like this, he wouldn't tire of it even after 100 years. The crisp morning air filled his chest, and Shushan felt a languid contentment. They weren't stolen, Xuanmin called from below, calm and measured. The Feng family must have seen the letter we left. These pastries were prepared as provisions. As he spoke, he stood up, his monk robe still spotless. He unfolded the letter, tucked in the bundle, and showed it to Shushan, then lifted the pastries. Hungry? Shushan swung his leg in a small curve. I wouldn't tempt me if I were you. Once my appetite gets going, even eating you along with those pastries won't fill me up. Phrasing. Xuanmin glanced at Shushan's dangling leg, looking faintly exasperated, then turned and placed the bundle of pastries before the newly awakened Shitu Zhang and Lu Nianqi. A kind gesture. Don't waste it. With that, he returned to the tree and tapped Shushan's swinging calf. What do you want to eat? We'll buy something in the next town. In the morning light, Xuanmin's dark eyes seemed to glow faintly. They were lighter than usual and strangely clear and gentle, like frost about to melt. That contentment from earlier grew even stronger, almost to the point of bursting out of Shushan's chest. He had the impulse to half-jokingly ask Xuanmin, once you regain your memories, if there's nothing urgent, why not stay with me? Just as he opened his mouth to speak, a faint sound interrupted them. Snap! Like a branch accidentally being stepped on. In the blink of an eye, Shushan was no longer lounging on the tree. With a few nimble leaps, he covered a mile in pursuit of the sound. Then, like a dragonfly skimming water, he barely touched the treetops before returning. Another blink, and he was back before Xuanmin. He loosened his fingers, letting a wooden pendant dangle from them. Familiar. Xuanmin's brow furrowed as he loosened his fingers, letting a wooden pendant dangle from them. Familiar. Xuanmin's brow furrowed as he pulled out an identical wooden pendant from his robe. Exactly the same. The pendant Xuanmin held had been taken in the underground stone chamber of the bamboo house from the man who'd set up the flow of 100 soldiers' array. According to that man, it was a peachwood pendant given to him by the sorcerer Song Yun, a mark of their sect. Shushan coldly jerked his chin toward the depths of the forest. When I was chasing that sound, I caught a glimpse of someone just as they vanished. They probably used an array to escape underground. I tried to seize them from afar, but only caught this. Still, it was enough to prove the person's origins. Shushan had thought it might be someone gathering firewood or herbs in the mountains at dawn, but this showed the visitor had ill intentions. Anyone carrying this pendant was connected to the sorcerer Song Yun and had come here because of the dragon bones. Shushan suspected that last night's threads had alerted them, prompting this scouting mission. Shushan took the pendant from Xuanmin's hand and crouched beside Lu Nianqi. Do me a favor. Divine where the person who touched this pendant is now. Though Lunyan Chi could seem indifferent, he was ready for action in critical moments. Without a word, he set down his pastry, took out his bundle of sticks, and began drawing on the ground. After a moment, he pointed west. Straight ahead, there's the mountain. Its summit looks like a horse's head. One side has 5 clustered stone peaks. The other side has a 6-story temple pagoda. Got it. Hold on to those pastries. Eat too many, and you might vomit. With that, Shu Xian gestured to Xuanmin, grabbed Shi Tuzhang and Lunian Qi, then transformed into a dragon. Riding the morning clouds, he headed west. Though Lunian Qi couldn't name the location, his description was specific enough that Shu Xian could easily spot the Horsehead mountain along the way. He landed in a secluded area hidden by the clouds. Without hesitation, Lunian Qi drew on the ground again. He's still on the mountain and hasn't left. Around the mountainside, that's strange. What? He just vanished. Lunian Qi sounded puzzled. Vanished, Chushian scowled. Dug his way to somewhere else? Not like that, Lunian Qi shook his head. When I say vanished, I don't mean he left the mountainside for another location. He just disappeared from the divination. Even as he said this, he seemed to find it hard to believe. He wiped the ground clean and tried again, only to shake his head once more. Still the same. Can't find him. Did he die? Or I feel like he'd be able to tell if he died. He wants to ask Xuanmin to live together. Yes, he does, Ruby. Shu Xian sneered at the upward curve of the mountainside. Fine, then we won't rely on divination. I'll unearth him myself. His instincts told him this situation was dangerous, so he decisively pricked his finger and smeared a drop of blood on the backs of Shi Tuzhang and Lunian Qi's hands, carefully choosing unbroken skin, to avoid dragon-related complications. Once done, he pointed toward a mountain path in the distance. Take that path. There's a tea stall leading to the county town. Wait there or go straight into the city. With dragon blood protecting you, you shouldn't run into trouble. I'll find you later. The bald donkey and I will investigate the mountain. 93. Shi Tuzhang and Lunian Qi knew their limits and didn't want to become burdens. Without argument, they both nodded, told Shu Xian and Xuanmin to be careful, and headed down the path toward the county gate. Shu Xian and Xuanmin exchanged a glance and swiftly made their way up the mountainside. After scanning the area, they spotted a concealed stone staircase deep in the woods, which led to a wide open building built in a relatively flat area. It wasn't a ruined temple or a resting pavilion. Shu Xian took a deep breath of the mountain breeze coming from that direction and grimaced in disgust. The stench of corpses. They climbed the stairs without hesitation and stood before the open door of the building. Shu Xian nearly staggered back from the overwhelming odor the moment he stopped. The smell would knock out a whole village. What kind of cursed place is this? The building's ceiling was unusually high, around 5 yards taller than the average house. That's 15 feet taller than the average house. That's ridiculously high. There was a wooden threshold at the door, but it was carved with twisted winding symbols and studded with nails along the edges. The entire threshold seemed to have been soaked or splashed with some kind of blood, leaving it dark and perpetually damp. Ew. It exuded a rusty metallic stench that mingled nauseatingly with the pervasive odor of rot. The building had no large windows, only 2 narrow ventilation openings high up on the walls like pinpricks. With so little light, the interior was dark and damp. Any living person would have been uncomfortable to stand near it, let alone try to peer inside. Shushan frowned and waved a hand in front of his nose, but it was useless. Resigned, he held his breath and scanned the area. Hanging on either side of the door was a pair of inscribed plaquettes? Oh, I guess small plaques. Well, this is ominous. That's very ominous. But they were so weathered that parts were missing. After scrutinizing them, he finally made out 8 words. The dead walk here, the living keep away. That sounded familiar. Shushan turned to Xuanmin with a questioning look. Given Xuanmin's temperament, asking him to open his mouth in such an environment was worse than death. The moment Shushan silently posed his question, he felt his wrist being lifted. Xuanmin, expressionless, traced a few characters on his palm. Corpse shop. A corpse shop. Shushan had heard of such places. In the region around the Xiang River, there were artisans who specialized in handling the dead. They escorted those who died far from home back for burial. They traveled only at night and avoided the living during the day. Since their journeys were long and couldn't be completed in one night, especially in rain or snow, every few miles there'd be stations for artisans and corpses to rest and shelter from the rain. These were called corpse shops. This is like the Pass of the Dead in Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Shushan had little contact with such matters, so his knowledge was limited. But as far as he knew, corpse handlers had strict rules. Most only took bodies before decomposition set in. Otherwise, wouldn't they have left rotting flesh and maggots wherever they went? The stench alone would have been unbearable. So for this corpse shop to reek so horribly was unusual. Resigned, Shushan covered his nose and mouth, then steeled himself and stepped inside. He glanced back at Xuanmin. Outwardly, Xuanmin looked composed, his only reaction a faint frown that betrayed his disgust for the smell and filth, but Shushan could read a trace of indescribable resignation in his dark, still eyes. Shushan almost laughed. It wasn't funny in itself, but the juxtaposition with Xuanmin was so stark it became amusing. Before the smile could form, though, he was hit by a bolt of realization. Xuanmin was always reserved, his emotions buried deep and impenetrable. Most people could stare at him for ages and not decipher his thoughts. Shushan often struggled to understand his moods, too. Somehow, in this moment, he could sense Xuanmin's emotions, effortlessly, even, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It hit Shushan, then. The copper coins. It was because of the connection forged by those coins. Their bond had grown stronger with each use, to the point where even subtle emotions could pass between them. Shushan's smile shifted uncertainly. Who knew if this connection was good or bad? If it deepened further, would he be able to tell if his happiness was his own or influenced by Xuanmin's emotions? If he was sad, would it double because of Xuanmin's feelings? Worst of all, if Xuanmin's reactions were reaching him, did that mean his own emotions and impulses were also reaching Xuanmin, including that almost spoken urge earlier? That would mean they were far too involved with each other. Just thinking about it made Shushan feel like he should discard his dignity and flee. He decided to tell Xuanmin about this change once they left. They should sever it, if possible, to avoid unnecessary complications. Unnecessary feelings? When he came out of his thoughts, Xuanmin was watching him, clearly puzzled by his awkward half-smile. Odd half-smile. Shushan waved him off and spoke without thinking. What? Ignore me. After the words left his mouth, he rolled his eyes, feeling like his soul had left his body. Xuanmin stared at him, but did not reply. Shushian turned his focus to the interior of the building, which was emptier than he'd expected. In fact, the entire building was nearly devoid of objects. No tables, chairs, or even stone stools to sit on. By the faint light from the ventilation holes, Shushian walked along the walls. Compared to the emptiness of the middle, they had more to offer. Nailed to them at intervals were palm-sized semicircular iron hoops, fixed into the stone on both ends, with a slight arch in the middle. These hoops were always paired, spaced about a person's width apart, lining all four walls in a full circle. Sure you want to do that, right? Sure you want to, separate? I don't know about that. Shushian studied them and noticed frayed hemp rope fibers on a few. That made their purpose clear. When corpse handlers rested here, they would lean the standing bodies against the walls and tie them to these hoops, partially to prevent them from slumping to the floor, but also to keep them from reanimating. Suddenly, his steps halted. One of the hoops had a smear of blood on it. Whether it was accidentally smeared on or splattered, it was unmistakably fresh. Without looking away, Shushian tapped Xuanmin and pointed at the bloody hoop. Xuanmin's brow furrowed briefly before smoothing out. He gestured at the corner he'd been standing in. Following Xuanmin's finger, Shushian spotted a coiled hemp rope and some crumpled paper on the ground. He had initially dismissed them as leftover trash and walked past them without a second glance. But if Xuanmin pointed them out, it couldn't have been that simple. Shushian still couldn't figure it out after pondering for a little while, so he dutifully held out his palm to Xuanmin. Xuanmin paused, then wrote with one finger, "Translocation Array." Compared to spoken words, writing on Shushian's palm was less comprehensive, and Xuanmin couldn't write anything too complicated. So he only traced 3 quick characters. There was no time to dwell on the array's real name. But Shushian understood what Xuanmin meant. Just like the person who'd vanished from Mount Lianjiang, someone here had used an array to teleport right before they had arrived. When they put it all together, it meant the person who had escaped was almost certainly the one Shushian was chasing. It was just... Xuanmin wrote on Shushian's palm again. More than one person. Shushian crouched beside the insignificant-looking rope and paper balls. The stench of corpses, accumulated over years, was even stronger near the ground, so he covered his nose and mouth. Up close, he saw a circle drawn in blood on the ground, rope coiled at its edge. The paper balls, talismans soaked in dried blood, were set around it. Beyond that, Shushian spotted something else. Near the corner, by the crevice in the wall, lay a few slender needles stained with dark blood, almost camouflaged on the ground. They would have been invisible without careful inspection. There were many uses for such needles, but in this foul environment, with the sudden disappearance Looney and she had spoken of, only one came to mind. In risky situations, some sorcerers used corpse generals, reanimated corpses that appeared almost human but were controlled by the sorcerer as substitutes. At the critical moment, pulling out their needles turned them back into lifeless bodies. The dead never appeared in Looney and She's divination results. If this was the case, the identity of the mastermind behind it was obvious. Having come this far, they could only step away from the culprit. Shushian wasn't about to give up. He grabbed Xuanmin's hand and wrote, "Can the array still be used?" "Give chase," Xuanmin wrote back. Shushian nodded. "Array is broken, but can be restored," Xuanmin concluded. With that, he pricked his finger and let blood drip onto the paper balls in a specific order. When the last drop had landed, the rusty blood circle brightened as if reactivated. Xuanmin motioned for Shushan to step into the circle. It was narrow and barely fit one person, so the previous group had probably left one by one. Shu Xian stood inside its bounds, about to go ahead, when he noticed Xuanmin's faint frown as he prepared to seal the array. Given Xuanmin's fastidiousness, standing in this building a moment longer would have been torture. Without thinking, Shu Xian grabbed his arm and yanked him into the circle just as the array activated. The force of this action caught Xuanmin off balance, and he crashed into Shu Xian. A gust of wind erupted from the blood circle. With a resonant hum, their surroundings changed. And that is where we're going to end for tonight and for this week. So for everyone that is here that wasn't at the beginning, we did pick our new book, and it's the White Cat Divine Scratching Pose. So this one. This one won. It was a close match, but this one is our winner. So yay! I will get some of these up as soon as I can. But that's part of it. Thursday, I will not be live streaming, but there will be a card opening stream, which I hope you all enjoy. And then next week, we'll just have our normal schedule, and we'll almost be done with copper coins, which is very exciting. But yeah, have a good rest of your evening or morning, depending. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. And for everyone watching later, I hope you enjoyed as well. Bye-bye, everybody, and I will see you next week. Bye.